battle of ideas.
Alright, I've returned. Sorry about that, folks, but we actually now have the wonderful, the majestic, the excellent BASTIAT now in the call. So, waiting on VAUSH now to come in. But that sexy bearded man will come in very soon, hopefully. How are you today, BASTIAT? Oh, we can't hear you. Make your microphone.
Sorry, how about now?
Oh, jeez, okay. Can you turn yourself down a little bit?
Okay, just a second.
Okay.
I didn't just hear you, my soul fell to you. Nah, you're great, dude.
Yeah, how was your holidays? How was Christmas for you?
How's that? A little better?
That's perfect.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, I had a great holiday. You know, the war on Christmas didn't destroy the holiday after all. So you know, it's good to just kind of be getting back into the swing of things with work, and it's great to go right off a long day of slaving away, pushing paper, to hop on here for a debate. So I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. Well, what do you think he'll be talking? What do you want to talk with VAUSH about? Like, is there any particular issue that you want to talk with VAUSH about?
I don't know, actually. I've been watching some of his videos to try and get a feel for him, because, you know, I do Twitch, so I don't really know much about him other than what I've heard, but I started watching some of his videos to try and get a feel. And, you know, I guess, you know, we'll probably cover some of the capitalism versus socialism sort of stuff that this suit seems to get people interested in. And beyond that, I mean, you know, World War III is trending, right? So we'll
Hell yeah.
You know, that'll come up.
My only goal is not to get drafted. Don't worry, I'm very ugly. I don't really don't have to worry about that one.
Wonderful. Well, if you feel like that, you're probably going to be in the front lines. But Mr. VAUSH, thank you for coming. Thank you very much for being here. We can't hear you. I don't know what's happening with the microphone.
My pleasure entirely.
Ah, thank you.
It's using the wrong camera for some reason. I'm trying to figure out how to get the proper camera being used there. Oh no, there we go. It's set on properly.
We're good. Wonderful. It's wonderful having you both here. It's wonderful to host this on my thing. It's gonna be wonderful. I haven't actually on this channel hosted a debate, but I think this is gonna be more sort of an open forum conversation more than anything. I'm just here just in case Bessie gets like too over the top, okay? You know, because there is a lot of Twitch clips of him just the amount of gamer words he said on Twitch and not got banned. It's insane. Like,
now, hold on. Unless neoliberalism has been declared a gamer word, I am not one to use gamer words.
Well, as we know, you are a Delaniac, so I thought that just comes with the territory.
In spirit, but not in spirit. But I don't. You know, he's not going anywhere.
Alrighty. So I guess let's just jump into it. So where do you guys want to start this? Where do you sort of feel like you want to start this conversation?
Well, how about I introduce myself, since I imagine a lot of folks, you know, who are watching your fine channel haven't seen me before. My name is BASTIAT. I do a lot of streaming on Twitch, and this is my first time on YouTube, so that's pretty cool. I am a neoliberal corporate attorney. I work in fossil fuels, and it's a lot of fun. It's interesting, challenging work, and I started streaming about 4 months ago. So I've been getting to know a lot of people. We're doing debates now, and yeah. So I'm looking forward to talking with VAUSH here.
Awesome. And do you want to make an introduction, VAUSH? For everyone, pretty much he already knows who you are, I assume.
Oh no, not at all. You never know who's come in, huh? Hey, I'm VAUSH. I do politics. I am not a corporate attorney for fossil fuel interests, which means that I'm the representative of the people here, not the Australian people, unfortunately, and terribly sorry about all that business, by the way. Seriously, though, jokes aside, BASTIAT, I actually have seen your content before on Twitch, and though you and I obviously share what is no doubt a tremendous glut of disagreements concerning economics, I actually appreciate your approach to most economic discussions, and I think that, for the most part, you lend pretty good analysis.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Wonderful. So, where do we want to start this? I had a couple of ideas we could talk about, because I know before being a Delaniac, you're obviously a Yang Ganger, BASTIAT.
Yeah, I like Andrew Yang. He's not perfect, but I like his two flagship proposals a lot, and I really think there's a lot to them. So, be happy to talk about those, and then we can go from there. So, the two big flagship proposals are one, the $1,000 a month. And by flagship, I mean the things that I think make him unique. He has a lot of other ideas that I think are less unique, but But these two I think are interesting. So one is the $1,000 a month universal basic income. It would replace certain social welfare programs in the United States, primarily food stamps and WIC, which are currently means tested and which in a lot of states you get for a fixed period of time. The $1,000 a month would not replace other benefits like disability, housing assistance, Social Security, Medicare, all that. And the basic idea with it is that you get it once a month, after you turn 18 years of age. And the only condition in which you'd lose it would be if you're in prison, you're not going to get your $1,000 a month. But as soon as you get out, you start getting it again. So that's the one big proposal he's got. And he plans to pay for that with, one, cutting the food stamps and WIC programs and a couple of other cash welfare programs as well. And then to institute a value-added tax along European lines to help pay for it. And then the other big idea is his democracy dollars idea. And that's sort of like a smaller UBI. In essence, it would be $100 for every campaign cycle for every American, again, over age 18, so that they could contribute that money during a political campaign. And the idea is basically bottom-up campaign finance reform. So rather than trying to publicly fund campaigns from the top, you would be publicly funding campaigns from below. And his proposal suggests that if we did that, you'd have about 8 times the money from ordinary American voters than you would have from corporate interests, whoever those might be in the system. So it would basically be a constitutional way to address the huge imbalance of basically money in politics. So those are the two ideas of his that I like a lot, and that's why I'm interested in them.
Awesome.
What would you do with your $1,000, Bastiat?
Oh, I'd probably invest it and just kind of sit there and watch it grow after paying off some debt. We just got a house, and it's of course a big money pit and all that. But that's what I like, and what I like about the basic idea behind it is that I know there are probably ways you could imagine a program that, if you targeted a program, maybe you could put more money, toward one cause or another. But with the direct cash transfers to people, that lets them make the decisions that are best for them. And I fundamentally believe that individuals are best equipped to make the decisions about, how to deal with the problems they face in their own lives. So it's not perfect. It wouldn't be like a replacement for, say, universal health care. But I think it would be a really good supplement to people, and basically capitalism that doesn't start at zero, right? So
I'm very surprised that you didn't say Disneyland. That's also a very good option.
Well,
But,
there
to
are
each their own.
there are a lot of people who. I live in the South, so it's not too far away. There are a lot of people who say that if you got free money every month, which is kind of what UBI would be, in a sense, that a lot of people would just be tempted to spend it on frivolities and drink it up, or whatever, And the studies that have been done on UBI. And again, nobody's ever done a study on what it would be like to give UBI to 300 million Americans. But the studies that have been done so far suggest that most people don't just kind of fritter it away. They may.
Nope. Do we lose him a little bit there? He's muted.
Oh, so sorry, Bastiat. Your mic just cut out.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I was just going to say there's a belief among some people when they first hear about this idea that if you get $1,000 a month, you'll be tempted to just kind of drink it, or waste it or something like that. Certainly some people would do that, but the studies that have been done on UBI, and again, nobody's done a study on giving it to 300 million people, but on the scales of the studies that have been done, and there have been a lot of them done, people tend not to waste the money. Some people do invariably, but most people spend it on things I think you would generally regard as socially useful.
Awesome.
Exactly.
So, VAUSH.
It's, yeah, go ahead, Josh.
I'm actually really interested. I know you trend towards neoliberalism. Yang's not exactly the big neoliberal pick. He tends to be more the center-leaning populists who go after Yang. What made you, I guess, push towards that as opposed to I don't know, more of like a Warren ticket, for example?
Yeah. Well, I don't like, and just to be clear here, while I'm talking about Andrew Yang, I'm going to vote for whoever the Democratic nominee is, even if it's Bernie Sanders. And I would prefer it not be Bernie Sanders because I don't like a lot of his approaches. But if it's him and Trump, I'm still going to vote for Bernie. Obviously, Trump, Trump is a real problem. As far as comparing him to them, I guess Elizabeth Warren's approach seems to me to be there are two elements of it that I don't like. One, I don't like the notion of a wealth tax. It seems like to the extent that it's been tried in Europe, it's for the most part been abandoned. I don't like a lot of the ideas for how she'd enforce her wealth tax too. To me, the notion of saying we're going to take 40 to 60% of your wealth if you try and leave the country to get away from it, that just seems fundamentally at odds with, I guess, the American system, to have that kind of punitive taxation if you don't want to participate in the system when you pick up your cards and leave. So I don't like that, and I also don't like I don't like her economic nationalism, or not nationalism, economic patriotism ideas. I think that's what she calls her plan, economic patriotism, and it amounts to a new system of tariffs and restrictions on trade, which she purports to say she argues that they would be beneficial in the sense that they'd bring other countries up to our level of labor regulations or environmental standards or whatever. But it seems like to me what it would really do is make goods more expensive for Americans. It would make make trade more difficult. And a lot of the gains that we've seen in reductions in poverty in the world at large and in the U.S. have been based in large part on that freedom of trade. So she claims though that this is something we need to do. I know Bernie Sanders also wants new trade restrictions, and Andrew Yang at least doesn't have a lot to say on trade restrictions, which I think is also for me a very important part.
I feel he doesn't have much to say on much beyond those central talking points.
Well, you're right about that. He doesn't really have much for foreign policy. He recently started talking about healthcare a little more, and he doesn't have a lot to say on, like, for a while he was talking about Medicare for all, which you could argue now is a little misleading, because he said, well, we want to make healthcare more affordable with some of these ideas that I have, and then we can afford to have Medicare for all. But I think that his campaign, to me, I guess, as somebody who likes these liberal ideas, I compare it with somebody like Mayor Pete, who doesn't seem to have a lot of. I really, I don't know. He's hard to read. He seems like he would just kind of float with the winds of opinion.
You don't have high hopes for his campaign.
Yeah, not really. Again, I would, if it were down to him and say Bernie, I'd probably vote for Pete. But if it were down to Biden and Bernie, even though Biden seems to be, have difficulty with coherent speeches sometimes, challenging people to push-up contests and all that, I'd still probably choose him. But I like Andrew Yang because he's got some new ideas. He gets people interested. He does seem to attract Trump voters as well, which I think is a helpful thing. So yeah,
he's getting those neat votes, right? I mean, for a lot of policy propositions, the actual outcome seems really removed from people's day-to-day lives, Oh, we'll invest more money in this specific industry, or we'll make an effort to pass through Congress an attempt at debt relief or blah, blah, blah. $1,000 a month, simple, easy. And his campaign slogan, like, what would you do with your 1,000? It's a lot less abstract than not me, us, or, I've got a plan for that. It's a very simple, direct, immediate, interpersonal sort of focal point that everyone can latch onto. So I can understand why he's popular, at least with that crowd. I'm not a tremendous fan of Andrew Yang, though I will admit his most recent performance in the Democratic debates, I thought he was pretty endearing. I'm not much of okay, pardon me for sounding a little anti-intellectual here. I'm going to try my best not to. I may care a little bit less about policy than you do. Policy is obviously very important, of course, and you need it to suss out what people's actual opinions are. But when it comes to long-term, meaningful cultural changes, sometimes I feel as though the attitude, the drive, the energy of a political candidate is as, if not more important than the actual policies they propose. Because, for example, you'll not find me defending protectionism anywhere. Maybe in developing countries that would benefit from, jump starting their own trade internally before heading out to the open market. Sure. But in America, absolutely not. And right. Bernie's protectionism is just not appealing to me. The reason I like Bernie is because, in spite of the policies with which I have tremendous disagreement with on, the energy that he brings, the sincerity that he has, I find very appealing. And that's, I think, kind of the vibe that I got from Andrew Yang in the last Democratic debate. Which was really quite nice. I'm still not a tremendous fan of the Yang Bucks, as it so happens. It's just it hasn't really grabbed me. Initially, the big reason I didn't like it was because, and he's since walked back on this, so it's not a fair criticism now, but initially it seemed like every conceivable form of like welfare pay or any government assistance programs would get deducted. And since then he's walked back. Now it's only some rather than all, which I think is a more tenable position, if nothing else.
Yeah.
But the main reason that I'm not in favor of it is because I prefer, when it comes to human essentials, a plan of decommodification. When it comes to stuff like food, housing, medical care, stuff we can't really do without. When we give people money, even if we ignore the fact, and you already addressed this, but there is definitely an element of people, with all due respect, wasting the money they receive. You know, we all have our vices. When you give them money, there are myriad factors between the, you know, receiving that government check and spending it on necessities that can keep you from getting the care that you need. Some your fault and many not your fault. Inflation, for example, if the amount stipend by the government doesn't increase along with inflation or such and such. But when it comes to decommodification, making something cost nothing, well, I mean, that's that. That's the system right there. It doesn't matter how much inflation you get from that point, you know, until the end of time. As long as the program holds steady, it costs nothing. Same with, like, and this is how rations used to be given out, you know, as far back as the Romans. They wouldn't give you such and such amount of money per farmer. You would be guaranteed this many bushels of wheat, you know, this many eggs per month. And it doesn't matter what inflation does to you, that's what you get. So that's the policy direction I tend to favor. Whether or not it can be immediately implemented, I mean, probably not. But I like things that lean that way. And that's why I'm very suspect of the for the Yang Bucks plan, because
the freedom dividend.
Right. The freedom dividend, the Yang Bucks plan, as it's formally known on his website. It makes me a little suspect of it, because it makes me worry that in the future our approach towards providing for the needy is going to lean more towards this this hyper commodification, but will cover the bill approach, which I'm not. You know,
I get what you're saying, and to that end, I mean, if that is your approach, the freedom dividend is, I mean, that's probably one of the reasons I like. No, that is not probably. That is one of the reasons I like it. Is that it makes that kind of decommodification. I don't know if I would call that socialism or not. I haven't really thought about the term very much, but one of the reasons I like it, you know, when I talk about it, is that I like the notion that this further strengthens capitalism. It strengthens the notion of exchange. So I do like it for that reason, absolutely, because I have no problem with that form of exchange, provided people can participate in it and satisfy their needs. I also, again, just to the notion of wasting money, I don't, and again, I know that was a small part of what you said, but I think that is just so difficult because, to me, when we think about that, you know, I always think about a story, when I had just got out of school and I was just working, and, you know, maybe this just sound folksy. I know anecdotes aren't worth much, but, you know, when I got out of school, we started a new job, and my fiance now and I were together then, and we had $16 between the two of us until our next paycheck. And she said, "Hey, let's go down to McDonald's and get us one of those dollar ice cream cones, right?" And I was like, "How can we do that? That would take, if we both got one, that would be 1/8 of our liquid assets gone, you know, just wiped out, right?" And and we had a little bit of a fight about it for about 5 minutes, and then, you know, suddenly I sat back and I thought, wait a minute, there's nothing we can do anyway, right? But that the moral value, like the morale value of this otherwise trifling, useless item, you know, it has a lot. There's a lot to it, right? And so what I mean by that is there are times when I think people have needs that go beyond, you know, say the staples of life, and, you know, maybe there are times in life where, hey, maybe a movie, you know, would really just turn your kind of mental well-being around. Just being able to take one of those pleasures of life that the government, you know, you're never going to ask somebody to directly buy for you, but nevertheless, which are a part of an ordinary happy life, you know, de-stressors, not just the ability in essence to buy the staples of life, but to participate in society writ large, irrespective of whether somebody regards it as a staple or not. You know what I mean? So I think I think that's another value of it, because it's hard to, I think, define what is a staple and what is not.
Well, that will be solved by Bernie's upcoming 3 movie tickets a month guaranteed, entertainment for all plan. I completely agree. I have no interest in reducing human existence down to base subsistence, where everyone has to rely on the government to get their bushel of apples, and then from that on they have sort of minimal engagement with the economy. It's the availability of luxury goods and entertainment that's made life so exciting to live, at least for us relatively privileged folks.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, over the past few decades. I just wonder the degree to which it really depends on how, I suppose, cynical you are about capitalism. Because when I think of everyone getting $1,000 a month, we can ignore the middle class, upper middle class, wealthy people. I think fairly, because they're doing fine. But when it comes to lower income people, do you think that the $1,000 will sort of be like wow, finally I'm paying off the debts. I've got a little more room for entertainment. I can finally afford a little bit nicer food. I'm not just living off of 7-Eleven hot dogs that have been left out. They're kind of wrinkled in the corner because they've been overheated inside. Yeah, are we going that way? Yeah. Or are we thinking predatory landlords or markets trying to capitalize on lower income families that suddenly have at the beginning of each month? Are we talking Powerball lotteries? And the degree of cynicism with which you sort of think about this, I think, matters. And I'm obviously not a capitalist, so that's the approach by which I'm going to come out from this.
Yeah. Well, I see where you're saying there, and in some cases, what you're saying is absolutely true. For example, in San Francisco, I know they've got a rent control law now, and again, I'm typically against rent control, but if you imagined a situation in a place like San Francisco, for example, which I'm using as a stand-in for no competition in the housing market, really, right? Like the zoning rules, the height restrictions, all of that make it super expensive to build new housing, right? In a situation like that, if you don't have some kind of rent control, and again, I still think the rent control would be more harm than good in this situation, but if you don't have some kind of control, then there really is nothing to stop you from raising that rent just $1,000 instantly. Because while I think in most places there's some competition, that helps keep prices down. Big Mac isn't just going to shoot up to, from $5 to $1,005, right? There's still competition between providers to help keep prices down. But in some areas where that competition doesn't exist, you'll see those problems. And so areas where markets fail right now, I think you'll see you could see an exacerbation there. At the same time, I don't know that makes that problem any worse. It just basically prevents you from taking full advantage of the $1,000 stipend. And one advantage of the $1,000 stipend in that situation is, ideally, for example, if you're in a situation where you live somewhere where you've got a landlord who is just going to, you have no choice, you stick with me or you're out, then, maybe you could move somewhere where there is a little more flexibility in the housing market. And again, that's not to say that we shouldn't be trying to solve these problems, but even just the increased freedom to be able to take your government benefit, use it to get up and move somewhere else, or to otherwise, rather than being anchored somewhere with it. Welfare benefits in the United States right now are handled mostly, not there are the federal benefits, but there are those state benefits too. And to be able to pick up and move or to switch jobs, it's all very difficult. And so the advantage here of the UBI is that it never really ends. So some of the problems you get with existing welfare programs, where it's hard to change your life in any kind of meaningful way. So I see the problems that you mentioned, and I acknowledge that some of that would absolutely happen. But I do think the fact that you would never lose the stipend, and the fact that you'd be able to use it to, change your life situation, maybe get out from under situations like that, makes up for that.
Yeah, it depends on where you're willing to put the money in. You won't find me defending rent control, by the way, or at least not rent control on its own. Maybe alongside government housing initiatives or the decommodification of housing, sure. But rent control on its own, I think, is typically a pretty unsustainable policy because it creates a market failure, or you can't meet the supply demand curve. I have a question for you. So moving, I guess, beyond just the UBI element, how do you feel about decommodification in general? The idea of taking some elements of the market and just removing it from market forces, flat government control.
Yeah. It sounds to me kind of like the sort of commanding heights of the economy argument of I guess, some socialists, where it's like, okay, we'll let you capitalists keep on making your Legos and your laptops and your nonsense stuff, but all the important stuff, we're going to handle that. We're going to take that out of the market. And what that seems to be to me is a recipe for shortages. You mentioned the word rationing before. Not, just as an example. I mean, rationing is typically like rationing is something that you have to deal with shortages. And I know that when you've got price controls, which I imagine price controls are an element of this decommodification, right? Because you're still somebody, presumably the government is still paying in some fashion for this. Somebody is providing something in exchange for these resources, presumably at a fixed rate. And that just seems like, to me, I mean, this idea of decommodification seems like it would just drive shortages in resources rather than abundance in staples like we've got now. Not all staples, but like food, for example. I mean, we've got plenty of that. Our problems with food seem to be more about, the quality.
I'd say we have a fair number of problems when it comes to those elements. When I suggested rations, I only meant it sort of as an alternative to the flat cash proposal of the UBI, because I mean UBI is. It's not a ration in the literal sense, but you divvy out such and such amount of money amongst people. What I agree that shortages are often a consequence of heavy government involvement in certain elements within the society that we have now. For example, the flat decommodification of all food production sounds like a ludicrous idea. I mean, that's like everything, like restaurants too. Like, where does that line draw? But when it comes to a sort of means-tested subsidy or decommodification of housing, say for example, for lower income or even like middling income families, I feel as though a fairly strong economic argument can be made for the implementation of services like these, because we do in a sense have we have an asymmetrical housing shortage in this country, not because we literally lack the houses, we have plenty of empty houses, but because there are places people want to live where nobody is building houses because it's not economical to do so, because it drives down the relative land value of the properties that are kept empty that people are using as investments. And that's, I mean, I know not everyone gets to live in LA or gets to live in New York, but this feels like not only is it kind of, shitty to the poor folk who live there who are being driven out, but it's also economically unsustainable in the long run, because even cities like San Francisco need janitors and baristas. And unless they're going to be paid $25 an hour, they need places to live too. So you've got folks who are commuting 3 hours a day to get in and out of these big cities because there's no housing being built within a reasonable distance of downtown. And it doesn't seem like the market's really offering a solution to that. The only real market solution would just be to let people continue commuting longer and longer distances until they stop and the city just kind of collapses or has its own little mini recession,
Yeah, I mean, I guess that is what would eventually happen, in the sense that, whoever is commuting 3 hours must be making enough for it to be, I mean, not to say that that everybody is able to make just the most, a simple economic calculus of I'm maximizing utility. I mean, I know there are always extenuating circumstances that keep people making decisions that might sometimes seem irrational, but I think that rather than thinking about decommodification, I would wonder, why is it that housing prices are so expensive in, say, San Francisco rather than, like Nebraska, for example. I imagine Nebraska, I'm not an expert on Nebraska, but,
don't shit talk Destiny's investment.
Right? I don't know. I'm just imagining it's pretty cheap. A lot of flat land, easy to build, not a housing shortage there. And if there is, please do correct me if anybody in chat can attest to that. But I wonder if, is it really just in San Francisco? Is it the nature of their shortage that it's just too crowded? There's just not enough room for people. I mean, I know you recognize some of the problems I mentioned about, say, zoning, right? I wonder if we could really, if we could change the laws there to make it so that you didn't have any of these, if you no longer had a concept like sunset rights, for example, where you have to be, when you buy a property, you're guaranteed a particular view, or you no longer had height restrictions, or you no longer had zoning except for health and safety. Like, you'd still have it for waste facilities and things like that, but you wouldn't have it just to protect property values or the aesthetic of an area. If you could do all of that, which I imagine, as difficult as it is, would be easier than decommodification of housing. If you could do all of that, I really wonder whether or not you would. I really wonder whether you would see improvement in the housing situation. And I feel like that's a much. For one, I think that's much easier than what you're proposing, and for two, I think it does respect something which is important to me, basic property rights. I don't have any problem with somebody buying houses to use that as an investment. I don't think that should should lead to shortages, provided you don't have some other artificial constraint on property. I think that if there are people out there willing to build more property to use as investments, that should still be improving, that's still money going into builders who are in the area doing construction. I mean, I think it's these artificial, legally imposed elements that drive shortages. And I know that San Francisco is always going to be a little different from Nebraska, because San Francisco is just, to a lot of people, a more pleasant place to live, and there is some limited space. But I can't help but think from my experience and what I've seen that the biggest driver of housing shortages seems to be law, rather than human nature or capitalism or geography.
Well, I mean, law in our society is a product of capitalism. Most laws are heavily supported by or pushed through those with the power and resources to do so. And it's not as though the common, the average $35,000 a year citizen is the one voting on all of these, housing restrictions that are keeping rent prices so high in San Francisco or LA or New York or what have you. It's mostly boomers who are holding onto their properties. They're having to pay so much in housing taxes, they can barely afford to hold on to something they should have sold back in the late aughts. And you have big businesses that are doing the same. Obviously, I have a bias against private property, as a concept with my, ideological pedigree.
There is a way I think you could push back even without depending on local voters, because I will say that to the extent you've got a town where it isn't as skewed as like Los Angeles or San Francisco, where I don't know if this is what San Francisco is like, but just imagine kind of this dystopian example where people are, all of the people who are doing the grunt work are commuting in, so they don't even vote there, right? The only people who vote there are the rich who want to keep their property rights. Okay, that may be a thing. If that's the thing, I see it's very difficult to persuade them to vote otherwise until things get untenable, which is tragic. And I really resent the use of government to, for example, bolster property values. That is really an infuriating concept to me. I feel like when you buy a piece of property, you should be entitled to the use of that property as you see fit, but the government should not be subsidizing your property values with like these zoning rules that, or aesthetic designs or whatever. But if you wanted to change that from outside, I think you could look at maybe, San Francisco is connected to the rest of the country by highways, just like just about everywhere else, right? So maybe when they want some more federal highway money, we have to tell them, okay, if you want this money, you need to change some of your laws, because at the end of the day, we're investing in your community, and we're giving you transportation resources, and you are creating bottlenecks by virtue of your zoning laws. In essence, I think federal interference, federal involvement would be a reasonable way to break up these kind of local knots like that.
Do you think federal involvement to break up those local knots would be more of a practical solution than the like a state involvement to subsidize housing or build a new line of housing in a given district? Yeah,
I do, and especially in California, where I know they've tried to do some. Building of houses for for homeless people, because of course they've got a huge homeless problem in California, right? I think rivaled only by I think Hawaii might have more per capita, but
per California, capita, but flat totals, right. Reagan
flat totals, How did Reagan do it?
Reagan, when he was governor, shut down all of the mental asylums, kicked them out in the street.
Oh. Well, that would be something to talk about sometime. But I think right now they are trying to build some public housing for homeless people there, and it seems like the cost of the public housing is always very expensive, because they've got to put it within the city, they've got to comply with all these same rules for new construction that everybody else does. And I remember reading one. I can't give you the source here, but it was. The price was somewhere between $250,000 to $500,000 per new unit. Because again, it's like a 3 or 4 story building, and all the units were very nice. And of course, I don't want anybody to live in misery, but of course, $250,000 to $500,000 a unit is not. Nobody's going to be.
No, that's not. Yeah, particularly economical. I would need to, educate myself on the specifics of that housing policy for me to know what exactly may have gone wrong there. But what was interesting to me is earlier you said maybe like a federal involvement to break up these knots. I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think that what's happening in most major cities here in America constitutes a market failure, because you have a cycle of independently legal and justifiable actions that lead to a broader problem. Housing prices go up. That's the right of the landowners. People buy investment properties but don't live in them because they're worth more, simply empty assets they can sell off later. Well, that's their property. That's their right. People are having to forced commute later and later to get into the city. Well, they could move to cheaper areas if they want to. But then you have these cities that have an economic disparity so substantial. It reminds me of the slaves and the pharaohs, where the poorer people have essentially no impact whatsoever on the broader legislative policies of the city, because everything at that point is dictated by capital in the interests of those who have the money to bankroll, the election campaigns of the local representatives.
Yeah.
And I just want to say, and I am not exactly an expert on housing policy. I recognize my limited knowledge in that respect.
Same here. I don't pretend to be an expert on that.
Yeah, we're doing our best. But it feels like if you look at how most essential markets run, so anything from medical industry to housing, what have you, it feels like we keep running into this same basic issue. The circumstances specifically vary, but the general idea is that there are people with a tremendous amount of money for whom the system works for them, and they make more money when the system doesn't really work for other people. And I don't know if there's a way to directly deal with that, to really hit the nail on the head without taking a look at the underlying economic system that we're trying to deal with here.
Well, so far, the only thing I've come to a conclusion that there really is no way forward except some kind of government involvement is like major government involvement. I guess a kind of decommodification is healthcare. That's the only thing I've come to where there's not a lot of, and maybe there are a couple examples I'm forgetting otherwise, but that's the only one I've come to the conclusion of where I can't see much of a way for markets to work well, because it's hard to negotiate in the back of an ambulance, and it's also, even if you could imagine that working, it's so it would be a new system we've never seen in the history of the world. There are 30 countries doing some form of universal healthcare. 30 developed countries, I think about 30, including Australia here, who we're all here today talking about. They've got some form of universal healthcare. So if you mean so I think there's some examples where.
Oh, we lost him. Well,
I'll take my win, please. Thank you. You can mail me.
Well, actually, I'll just take a quick
Washington.
moment here as we come close to the 9-hour mark. Just for everyone in the chat, make sure to check down the links down below to donate together to help with the bushfires, because there is a lot of people suffering at the moment with the bushfires, and if you can drop $1, $2, $3, $4, a couple of $1,000s, that would be wonderful. Just to help out with the people down below. That would be wonderful. But anyway, Bastiat, is he back, or is he still frozen? Because he looks like he's thinking very hard.
I can do my spiel as well if you would like.
Oh, that would be good.
Yeah, guys, go fucking donate, stupid piece of shit. You give me way too much money. Just go do it.
Yeah.
This time it's do it somewhere else this time. Go for it. Seriously, the whole continent's on fire. Their government's not going to do anything about it. Have you seen the Australian Prime Minister? Do you have any idea what that person's attitude is towards climate change? Nothing is going to get done unless
To be quite fair, a lot of the fires are actually arsonist based. It's not necessarily just climate change, but that is obviously an issue there as well.
Yeah, but they're spreading like crazy because
definitely.
Yeah. I'm very privileged. I live in the Pacific Northwest. If an arsonist tried to start a fire here, we'd get snuffed out by the next blade of grass it tries to hit.
Hey, you there?
Hey, Bastiat.
Hey.
Oh,
Okay, sorry about that.
again.
Well,
yeah, okay. Why don't you just get the camera?
Okay, well, I just got to make 2 points. So whether or not if you're a capitalist, that means charity's great because, it's giving the people to choose where the money goes, and, it's better to go to the charities, And if you're left-leaning socialist, you just got to spread that wealth around. So I think that works both ways here.
A ubiquitous argument. I actually make broader political arguments against the existence of charity, but as long as they exist, you should probably give to them.
I actually heard somebody in the chat was saying, oh, wow, VAUSH is here for charity. I read his Discord, and they said charity was terrible.
Dab, dab.
They caught us. They caught us.
So what I was saying was, I don't know if you caught any of that. My Discord just crashed.
I caught a good
So-
chunk of it before you went out. You were talking about how you agree that medical care is probably
Okay.
something that should be.
So with medical care, there's a nexus between the fact that this is difficult to do with markets, and so many other countries are having good healthcare outcomes without full full free market healthcare. I'd like to look at an example like Germany and Japan, where they still maintain private markets but have universal coverage. So that is something I like. But I'm not aware of too many examples beyond healthcare where there's a real argument for that. And even there, I do have people who are constantly telling me, no, we can do healthcare with the free market, and I just haven't invested any time in it because that seems kind of like, a utopian dream in terms of practicality that's ever going to happen. So I haven't really thought much about it.
I think that's fucking ludicrous. I mean, the American system is clearly not working.
Well, but that's the thing. Like they would say, and I think with some justification, the American system isn't a free market system. It's a messy, destructive hybrid of all of the above. It tries to be both and fails at being either. So but in any event, I think it's much likelier that we'll go to more government involvement than less. So I'm not really trying to push back on that.
I don't disagree. Healthcare isn't a free market; it exists. But that seems to me like somebody who's like you approach someone who's in pain. They're wearing two items of clothing, and one of them is a T-shirt, and the other one is like a cod piece with the spikes pointed inwards. And you think like the clothing's the issue. There's no doubt about that. Maybe if we removed the T-shirt, everyone knows the insurance companies are the problem with the medical system here in America. That's like far and away the bigger issue. I think most people would agree to simplify a more complicated issue.
Well, I'm not gonna defend our insurance companies, but I do. The entire insurance system was sort of like this patch job solution to healthcare that government has tried to shoehorn into a form of health coverage that I don't know that it was ever originally intended to be that way when these companies came around in the early part of the 20th century, and now the system is designed around them. So I guess if you wanted to make an argument for free market healthcare, I think maybe you could, but I feel like it's not. I mean, rather than do that, there are at least 30 countries out there that have good universal systems with good outcomes, often better than ours. That that would be the much more practical thing to do.
Cuba
especially considering, what's that?
Oh, Cuba does pretty well. Just that's one of their exports. All the good doctors they have.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily sold on that. Although I do hear that they have some good doctors, I've heard. But I was thinking more like Germany and Japan have systems where you still have private providers, but it's still universal coverage. Costs are controlled, outcomes are great. Everything seems to be pretty good. But I don't think that argument applies across the board, and I think that it's pretty unusual that I would want to concede something to that is
dirty
as close
socialism?
as I think. Yeah, basically. Yeah. For example, I work in energy, and that's where I was talking when I got cut off. So I work in energy, and for a long time, people thought that's a monopoly. The government is always going to regulate the price of energy. It's always going to be provided by basically monopolies, either by the state or by some monopoly utility. And in the last 20 years, really in the last 30 or 40 years, in the United States and in some European countries, I think in Australia as well.
Oh, yeah.
Natural gas, right? Natural gas and electricity have been unbundled, and not everywhere, but in a lot of states. So now the pipelines for natural gas and the power lines for electricity, they remain a tightly regulated monopoly. But the service that goes over those lines and pipes is competitive, right? So rather than conceding the entire thing, we try and delineate the spheres of which are properly competitive, and which just the nature of pipelines and power lines is we can't really have competing sets of lines. So that is a regulated monopoly. That's still not decommodification, but it's something approaching.
Of course. And I wouldn't advocate for the decommodification of everything. Now, mind you, 200 years in the future, glorious socialist utopia, maybe we can make arguments for this or that. But in the meantime, usually when I advocate for decommodification, it's for systems that just functionally don't seem to be working right now, largely because the consumers of that product aren't capable of fairly negotiating for what it is they want. If I want, I just bought, I repping my soy boy credit. I just brought a Nintendo Switch the other day.
Yes!
I could have not done that. Oh, you got one? Fuck yeah! I've been playing Baba as you.
You gonna add me on Switch, bro?
Have you been? Hey, you got the gray one too, not the fucking red and blue one. Do you have Baba as you?
No, I don't. I'm more
It's a
of
really good. It's a really
more
good
of a-
puzzle game. Just
I'll check it out. I'm
Yeah,
more of a Mario Kart gamer myself, so don't throw it out.
Wait, I have a Wii U. Is that okay?
I was gonna say,
that's. I
I'm
mean,
a
old school
kind
now.
of guy, so hit me up.
Yeah, I don't have it in my room, but next time I get the chance. But obviously, I could have not bought a Switch. When it comes to very essential things, the dream that I imagine is that every human is afforded a dignified life from the get-go, with some minor variety. We can't fix all issues. I think like things like education, housing, medical care, and maybe a stipend for food, a very baseline stipend. I think decent economic arguments can be made for some levels of commodification of those systems, even within a capitalist society. I worry about the housing crisis. The knot you referred to earlier seems like it's happening in almost every major city with more than like 100,000 people.
Yeah.
And while federal intervention would probably help quite a bit, I just don't know how much I could hope on that level of bureaucracy able to effectively delegate solutions to so many different areas for so many different people.
Yeah.
Food is mostly taken care of. There are food deserts in certain areas. But that's a broader sort of socioeconomic problem than it is like a commodification issue. It's not like the government's going to show up with a drone delivery of bread and apples every day.
Yeah.
And medical care, I mean, we agree on that argument. I assume you also agree that at least up till grade 12, education should be free and accessible to all Americans.
Yeah, although I do have people in my community who are routinely telling me you shouldn't be forcing kids to go to school. You should only let them go
Hell
to school.
yeah.
You should make it possible for them to go to school. Of course,
They're
like they
not
should have the
gonna
ability to go to
take
school,
it.
but you shouldn't force them to
No.
go to school. Which is something I've been thinking about, but that feels like really I don't know.
And how
there's a
old
lot
were
there
those
that-
people in your community by
They
chance?
they actually attest to be graduates of school. So.
Oh,
I
okay.
can only say,
All right.
but that's as much as I've been willing to entertain. And maybe there's something to the notion that you shouldn't force people, but that's the kind of decision that I feel like in practice that might sound good, but in practice you're really, when you say to a 14-year-old, hey, make your own decision as to whether you want to go to school or not, what you're really saying is, it seems like you're denying them education because they're not old enough to make decisions for themselves.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
what that sounds like to me is a free pass for poor families when their kid's 16 to rip them out of school and put them to work immediately so they can help with the family bills. Which
Well,
I don't
yeah,
know if that's the
yeah.
way forward on that issue.
Yeah, no, I don't feel that way. I don't feel that way either. But that's the closest I've come to somebody trying to convince me that the status quo is not good on K through 12. College, I don't know. I haven't thought much about it because the only thing I've heard is that they tried it in Britain and then they rolled it back, and I don't really know about how it works in other countries. I'm skeptical of the notion that like college deserves special treatment because while I certainly spent far too many good years of my life in school. I feel like sometimes, of course, it was beneficial, but I sometimes resent how many years of life it consumed. But man, what a privileged thing to say. But
I know, I get you.
yeah.
You went to law school. I mean, you
Right.
you went to school, and I do. How old are you? Out of curiosity.
32.
Gotcha.
Yeah. How about you?
I'm 25.
Really? Wow.
I'm just
you got a
I'm just
Viking beard. I never would have
really scruffy looking today. I'm actually I should have said this at the beginning. I'm actually sick. I woke up this morning with a head cold. So if I come off a little bit drowsy, I apologize.
Well, thank you very much. for
No,
coming.
that
I was gonna say I'm pretty damn jealous of your beard right now, quite frankly. I've already
Yeah,
got
seriously.
the Viking heritage, and fuck, dude,
In fact,
can we
I-
trade?
yeah, I want to say like Union General beard actually. Viking maybe not, but Union General. I feel like you could march through Georgia with that beard.
Listen, I'm just trying. We're at Union General. I'm trying to go up to leftist academic. I just match the glory of my
I'm
ancestors.
just trying.
I'm just saying, Bastiat, you look like you are going to march on a freaking King's Landing right now.
Well, I'll take that.
I can't even
as long as
grow a
I'm not
mustache.
the genocidal queen riding the dragon, But
Listen, I trade a little bit of
that
my
helps definitely when it comes to politics.
I trade a little bit of my beard for that sick fucking swoop, Bastiat. Okay, that's some
thank
shit
you.
you're born with. Okay? That's not.
Same here.
That's the inequality of man right there.
I know, man. There's yeah, it's funny how charged it is. I was talking to that fella, Mike, Central Committee on Twitch, and he was saying, "Oh, well, enjoy while it lasts. You're because my hairline is stronger, and I'm gonna keep my hairline longer." So that was funny. We have arguments about it sometimes.
I mean, hey, you're both, public figures. You can check in every couple of years, see how it's going. Maybe do like the kid when you measure their height on the edge of the door frame. You can measure with like a marker where your hairline's at.
Dude, I have no doubt it's receding at 32. I just hope to hide it for as long as I can. That said, I do I think that so education is one that I think I guess I broadly agree with your goal. I am skeptical of notions about taking like because it seems like what you're saying is you don't like the idea of saying, okay, we're going to guarantee through market forces, assuming where they work, we're gonna have prices relatively low, or at least achievable, and then we're gonna set this stipend at a level to where you're going to be able to meet, most of your basic needs. And then, of course, how you spend your stipend is up to you, right? It sounds like what I don't understand is why that's really like not enough. Why do you want to go farther? Is it just because you view what you're saying as more politically practicable?
There are broader moral issues that I think capitalism sort of manifests that I don't think could be addressed through like through just like a monetary or in-market solution. I think there are some issues or some externalities that can never be addressed within a free market that need to be handled through through other ways. And so many of my proposed solutions to existing problems are trying to serve a dual purpose of addressing them while also pushing us in that direction, which is one of the reasons why I would support like a more decommodified approach towards helping poor families than a UBI, at least within our existing system. A UBI in a socialist society would probably be pretty cool, I think.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's I guess it depends on what kind of socialism you have, right? Because if it's ideal, why do you even, why do you even need money at that point, right? I mean, that's
the goal,
it's the dream, right?
Honestly, though, in all likelihood, from what I've seen of your content, I imagine that you and I probably have the exact same goals when it comes to the broader redistribution of wealth in society and how society should function. Yeah, it's just a matter of the frameworks we want to set up for them.
Yeah, although I do think, I think that individual property rights are really important and shouldn't be written off. Even it shouldn't necessarily be written off. Shouldn't be written off purely because of in this case they're worthwhile, in this case they're not worthwhile. I feel like that's a really fundamental right. And to me, it's just about being. What's that?
Just to clarify, out of curiosity, when you talk about property rights, are you referring to your ability to own your own home?
That kind of thing.
What you have around you, or do you mean like investment in capital, the ability to own a factory?
That's a kind of property too. Yeah, I mean,
So you're not distinguishing between personal and private property. You think both?
I don't. Yeah, I don't. Okay. I don't typically make that distinction. And I think that it's important to be clear about what is your property and then what is government protection of property. Like, I don't think you have a property right to a zoning law, for example, that maintains the value of your home, just as an example. But at the same time, I don't when people say, well, there's enough houses for everybody, so why do we have the homeless, right? Just take the houses and redistribute them. I think that's to me that's a really fundamental transgression, and that's not to say I don't want to help the homeless. It's just to say that I don't want to do it through that means, because I think that's a fundamental transgression. I use crossing a line I'm not comfortable with, kind of like restriction on speech.
Appointing people to government houses is also something I'm not comfortable with. Just so you know.
What do you mean by appointing people to?
I don't like the idea of the government being able to impose on anyone like a change in their lifestyle unless it's absolutely necessary or unless they've broken like a law. So the idea of a family being appointed to a house, I like that. Just that sets off so many alarm bells. So there are so many systems that have failed with.
What's an example of that? I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure what you mean. Like I'm imagining. I saw this movie Threads about like what the world would be like after nuclear war, and the commissars that ran the world afterward were like, okay, you get this house and you live there with these people, and but I mean typically nobody's really proposing that, right?
Oh, I mean, I'm certainly not. No one in my community is. I think that we have to be really, really careful, because when people talk about socialism, a whole bunch of ideas crop up in people's heads. Everything is evoked from Bernie Sanders, maybe on the more palatable end, to like Joseph Stalin. and every conceivable failure of socialist societies in the past is invoked. And and there you go. He's a terrible writer, by the way, Joseph Stalin. If you ever read any of the stuff he wrote.
I actually do. I have.
Oh.
Sorry. Foundations of Leninism, and yeah, it's not much of a read.
Yeah, such is life. We can't all
better
be,
writer, better writer than Hitler, though. Definitely, hands down.
Yes. So when I propose like solutions, I try to be really, really careful with my language, because when I talk about decommodified housing, what I mean by that usually is targeted government programs to introduce housing that can be accessed at very low market rates, relative to the local market, voluntarily for people. But some people, when they hear that, when they hear decommodified housing, they hear the government seizes all existing property and then people are assigned housing.
Oh, okay.
I have to be very careful not to get that. Now, mind you, in the long run, because I do believe in transitory politics, I do believe far more radical solutions than anything I would propose here are possible. But the main concern I have between where we are now and where we're going to be 100 years in the future and what we need to do to get to that point is that right now I don't think the population of this country is acclimated to the idea of voting in their own class interest. We have a very diluted population right now. In regards, they don't really know what they benefit from, and it makes it impossible for me to propose democratic solutions because I know that democracy wouldn't sway the way I want. So I instead advocate for more quiet, slow solutions while slowly improving the cultural zeitgeist of the country to the point where we maybe could make better decisions.
My first response, just mentally, to what you said was, he wants to, the Trojan horse. And then I was thinking, well, I do talk about, I did one time say, I want healthcare for everybody for the same reason Bismarck wanted healthcare for everybody, which is to say to quiet down the socialists. So I guess I'm taking it from the opposite. Well, I tend to think that if you had, it seems like so much of the rise of people like Bernie Sanders is driven by just these totally understandable anecdotes. You can go bankrupt if you get really sick in this country and your life is ruined. The end. If you could solve some of those really terrible problems, then you're left with, to me, more theoretical issues, or issues that are harder to kind of, get militant about, to me. So I feel like I'm on the same page as you in the opposite direction in what I want to preserve through the policies, or what I want to work toward in the policies that I have in mind.
But on a fundamental level, you and I both care about stuff like freedom, diversity of available goods to the population, flourishing culture. And I've seen your streams, by the way. Your policies on economics are not at all informed by racial supremacy. I think that's fairly
well, that's a good bar to set at.
What's that? Yeah, that is a good bar. That's something actually I'm really curious about. How could what is an example of an economic policy animated by race? Is it just hostility to welfare queens and that kind of stuff, or what do you have in mind as the
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, I have played Skyrim, and that actually is surprisingly relevant to the broader point. I think the most obvious one is probably we need to protect our borders. We need to let in less immigrants.
How do you feel about
98% of the time? 98%. I love immigration. As long as the country can handle it and we don't spiral out, and we can't handle the amount of people we're bringing in. Yeah, absolutely. Fucking why not? These people bring in labor. It increases our general, market power. Also, frankly, I like diversity of culture. I like having people come into this country. Los Angeles, the city I grew up in and spent most of my life in, it's a beautiful city. Not literally. It's actually an ugly, squalid hunk of concrete spread out over many, many square miles. But metaphorically, it's a beautiful city, and there's a lot of stuff to do there. And it wouldn't be that way if we had just, America firsted our way through immigration policy, up until 2019. But another big one that I hear when it comes to the the racism in economic policy is that neoliberalism is, I say very placidly, or often accused of forming perpetually imbalanced economic dependency on non-developed nations on developed nations, because they're encouraged by the IMF and World Bank to adopt free market policies that make them amicable to Western businesses who come in and set up shop there and exploit the low wages and blah 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 blah. And some people when they propose those policies, like older neoliberals, for example, like Clintonites or even before then, I imagine that might have a little bit to do with racial supremacy.
No, I don't. I can't speak to that last one, although I'm not denying that's a possibility. But I can't speak to the racial element of that one. I'm not denying it's a possibility. I just, that's my first time hearing the notion of, like, for example, what happened with Haiti when they were given. I forget who said to do this, but basically they were said, in exchange for this aid, drop your tariff barriers. And, as a result, their agriculture couldn't compete with our subsidized agriculture. And, of course, when you're at that level of development, that's your export, right, is your agriculture. So that kind of shock to the system really messed everything up. So, I mean, I grant you that sometimes those policies, like, at a certain level of development, maybe. At the level of development of the United States, I don't think there's, of course, any argument for any restrictions at all, but, of, like, trade. But, maybe at that level there might be. But as far as immigration goes, it's interesting because that's actually, of all the policies I ever talk about, by far the most controversial one. Because I'm always saying I want to, as far as possible, open the borders so that people can flow across as freely as goods and, do today. With the exception of the three exceptions that come to mind to me are people who have committed violent crimes.
I thought it was people.
People who have some kind of communicable disease. Presumably, we'd want that to clear up or go away first, and then. People who are in organizations that have committed violent crimes. So I guess a member of Al Qaeda, right? Now, okay. I used to think, okay, well, a violent organization, even if they haven't done anything, but I think that's too nebulous. So it would have to be an organization that is literally itself engaged in violence. So those are the three exceptions I've thought of in my mind that I would think of in terms of I don't want to open to that. But other than that, and I do think that's still a pretty wide door. I really want immigration to be open for the reasons you described, and I've tried to think of different ways to explain this to people because I always get the same arguments. One, you don't understand what it's like in these other places. They won't assimilate. Which again, even if that's super important to you, is like historically demonstrably false, right? But so I guess that's kind of the racial element that you're speaking to, right? Like they can't exist. They can't exist, but they won't know how to live in our society. They won't blend in, right?
Yeah. It's nonsense, of course. Economic protectionism is a guise for racial supremacy.
Yeah. It oftentimes seems to be.
It's one of the reasons, as why I said earlier, I worry now about like broader propositions in the future because right now people have no class consciousness. They don't know how to advocate for their interests because this is one of the big ones. This has been done now for centuries. Yeah. It's big business folk have taken the antagonism of the working class and redirected it from them against usually racial minorities. This is one of the reasons why this is one of the ways unions were attacked back in the early 20th century. It's really interesting because you can go back and the rhetoric is almost identical to what we have now. When unions were striking, the big bosses, what do they call them? They had a big mean word for it.
Trusts?
Robber barons.
Yeah.
They would disseminate essentially like agitative racial propaganda. And as a result, many of the unions didn't take blacks in. They only had the whites in. So when the white unions would strike, the black workers would just go right the fuck back to work because why would they risk their jobs if they're not even benefiting from the strike, which means the strike would inevitably fail. And it reminds me today of what we have going on now where, corporations are profiting in many ways from a system which is, I think most would say, fairly imbalanced in their favor. And a lot of the people who are suffering the most from this, people out in like the Rust Belt or like the Midwest, they're dying towns, their antagonism is directed against people of a skin color they've never seen before in their lives. And a lot of that is through, like Republican Party propaganda or apparatuses that are supported by big businesses. They benefit from the immigration, but they also benefit from the demonization of the immigrants.
Yeah. It helps them keep them in that limbo where they're, I guess they would presumably prefer them to be illegal immigrants so they could exploit them as fully as possible rather than have any protections. Like, for example, one thing I run into is I'll hear people say, I'm not against immigration, all right? Libtard, I'm not against immigration. I'm against illegal immigration. And I'm like, well, what I'm saying is just we would make the illegal people legal, right? And that seems to be a really difficult, that seems to be a really difficult kind of, concept to get around, because it as much as I want to agree with you that it's always, it feels often animated by race. There are some people who will say, no, look, I don't care about that. I don't see color. All right. It's more about just, I want people to follow the law. And that is, to address that response, I've tried to say, well, look, I understand. I believe in the rule of law as a worthwhile concept, a concept I think has far more, good than bad. But at the same time, imagine you're in the situation of these people. Imagine saying, hey, look, you could come to the United States and improve your economic outcomes immeasurably, even under the flawed system right now where you're going to be an illegal immigrant when you get here. You can improve outcomes for your family, for yourself, and, all that. But you really shouldn't do it because you're going to be violating the law. Like that argument just...
No, it's fucking ridiculous. And they would never do it, too.
Yeah.
All these boomer moms on Facebook, they talk about, likewise, if a government ever showed up to my house, to take my guns, to blow them front porch, or if they ever did anything with my little boy Jimmy, these people are at the drop of a hat, they'll talk about murdering public officials, but rule of law is sacred to them when it comes to whether or not you can save the life of a brown family. I'm actually curious, really quickly, how did you feel, because someone in chat just brought this up, and this may be a little bit of a whiplash, but how did you feel about the recent incident in Bolivia?
Oh, this is...
Yeah, I think that to use the word coup for me feels difficult because it wasn't tanks on the presidential palace. But at the same time, the OAS report, I haven't read the final one that they just published. But, it was kind of strange that the OAS report was issued so concretely and so quickly, and that he was pushed out of power, even though he agreed to new elections. But at the same time, I don't know how strange that is, considering, if Trump was like, okay, I know I rigged the elections, or I know there were some problems with the elections, just let me do a do-over and it'll all be okay, all right? It's difficult for me to come to something consistent there, because I am really biased in favor of the people who were protesting against him, because he already lost that third-term referendum, and was then kind of went to the court, and they appealed to the OAS. They appealed to the standards set by the OAS to say actually it would be a violation of his human rights if he is not permitted to run again. So he gets to run again. So it felt like there was some really sleazy stuff going on, and then it felt like there was some really sleazy stuff going on against him too. So I want to. I want to wait for all the facts to come out.
I sympathize with the position that they found themselves in, the broader party he was a part of, because he was, I think Evo Morales was pretty much factually, objectively the best thing to happen to Bolivia in a really long time. Just if you look at the economic metrics, he did a phenomenal job. He was beloved. He abolished some of the more racial apartheid-ish elements of the prior, system. Right. But I don't think that's a good justification for, staying in office until you're a corpse. It seems like he had sort of the legal justification in every instance. You could form an argument for him continuing to run again and again. But as I have to be suspect of power. I purport to be an anarchist, even if I like the power that we're talking about. The main issue that I have is I feel like a lot of people talk about his, I think we could say pretty easily, very convenient interpretation of the new Bolivian constitution, and having taken advantage of the Supreme Tribunal's decision that the human rights, everyone should be able to vote for whoever they want, so he gets to run again. I think it's very, very convenient. But at the same time, even if everything in the OAS report was substantiated, which we can't independently verify, of course, it seems like the best argument that could be had there was him getting to redo the election under OAS watch, really sort it out. And that's what he offered to do, and then he got forced out. I wish he would have been given a chance.
What gets me about that is, and by the way, Ancient BB, I own 4 cats, not 9 cats, but you're close. The reason I'm skeptical of that interpretation is that the only thing I'm skeptical about is I wonder how much of that is colored by the fact that the person who replaced him, Anya's, I think is her name, seems like super fascist, if not in her acts, like in terms of her speech, like totally racist. I don't know a lot of what's gone down since it's dropped out of the news of the last month or so, but I know there was talk about police killings after she took power. Like I think I'd read somewhere recently that about 30 people had been killed since she took power. I don't know, but I wonder how much of that is just colored by the fact that she seems like such a bad person to take over for him. And if that's the case, it just feels like it's. It just feels hard to separate what replaced him with the notion of somebody trying to hang on to power forever. Because when I think about it, I imagine, what if President Trump, he memes about this, what if President Trump said, you know what, the Democrats really cheated me out of my first term, and I won that second election fair and square, so I'd say I'm entitled to a third. I mean, wouldn't you say I'm entitled to a third? And then he goes before the Supreme Court, and as much as I want to say the Supreme Court would never do this, because our Supreme Court operates on integrity and all that, the 25th Amendment is so clear, I don't know that you could ever interpret it any other way. But if that happened in the United States, I don't know what I'd think. I think it would be really difficult to just say, you know what, yeah, I'll just, like a lot of crazy things would be on the table at that point. You know what I mean?
I will say this, as horrible as that does sound, I'm not going to pretend it doesn't. I don't actually have any particular love for term limits as a concept. So if Trump did manage to get, legal permission for running for a third term, as much as I wouldn't like him, I would, as a matter of consistency, I would have to, abide the process. With that being said, though, oh, sorry. Oh, you cut out. Bastion, no!
Yeah, sorry, one argument for term limits in a presidential system. You can hear me now, right?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Yeah, it's the push to talk is just I'm not used to it. So in a presidential system, as opposed to the parliamentary systems they have in Europe and Canada.
Oh no!
Good Lord!
Sorry, it's push to talk. I don't know what's going on.
No worries. As the presidential
presidential systems. If you look up the article on Wikipedia about presidential systems, they are just kind of inherently unstable compared to, or not inherently unstable, but more unstable than, say, parliamentary systems, where it's easy to get rid of the prime minister through like a vote of no confidence or whatever, right?
Right.
The president, on the other hand, has fixed term limits. And so basically the check is you have the impeachment process, which we're seeing how well that's working out right now. We've never had anybody removed after impeachment, too. So it's, and then, you've got elections. And I think that term limits for the president, given how powerful presidents are in presidential systems, there's a really important argument for them as a matter of just like, otherwise, historically, it looks like presidential systems degrade into a kind of authoritarianism just because of the nature of presidential systems, the power that an elected president has, the legitimacy they can call upon as a branch independent from, the Congress or whatever, assembly they've got. So it's in a system like, in Europe, maybe, or in most of Europe where they've got parliamentary systems, maybe then term limits, because it's so much easier to get rid of the executive, aren't such a big deal. But in a presidential system, I think they're really important.
I would need to go over the data in that respect. I haven't actually thought about the difference in how a term limit might affect a presidential versus a prime ministerial system. But that's an interesting distinction. I'd have to look more into it. I think we can both agree, though, if nothing else, and I do very much believe what happened in Bolivia was a coup. And I'm glad you agree that Janine Áñez is a fucking lunatic, came in fast. Like the indigenous people are of the devil,
Yeah, Jesus is back.
Yeah,
We're
exactly.
We're going to make Bolivia great again.
At least she kept it blatant, I suppose, that the power transition had happened. But I'm sure, you and I would both agree, though, that probably best case scenario would have been like a redo of the election under OAS watch or something. If there were irregularities that dictated the people didn't actually want, Evo Morales, then it could have gone to his next runner-up.
The reason I can say that with some comfort now is that what happened afterward is so much worse. But, for me, it's hard to make that distinction.
All right. Just so you know, in recent news, actually, I'm actually forgetting. It's the OAS party, I think. Whatever the name of the party Evo Morales was a part of.
Yeah.
They're prepping for the next set of elections, and the what was you called them? The trainee, the the person who Evo Morales has been mentoring, the next up for the party, who's been not too well known prior to this point, I don't think, seems to be leading in the polls. So it looks like Evo Morales' party might continue, if not the man himself.
You know, what's interesting is that I heard that the reason that he went for the third term was, I mean, I'm sure there's always an element of self, you know, I want to be in power, but I remember reading also that they just couldn't find somebody, or they claimed they couldn't find somebody who could be, you know, who could be as good for the movement, as it were, as he was. So if they found a replacement, that's a step forward.
Very popular there, or he was at least in his first two terms.
Yeah, certainly
less
for the first two.
Now, but more back then. He's almost like the Luna, you know, of Bolivia. Luna Libre from Brazil, you know.
Oh, Lula.
Hell yeah.
Arrested. Yeah.
Oh,
Back out.
yeah.
Back out, appealed, got one of those appeals, back out there fighting the system.
That's right.
Yeah, successor. Thank you, Chad.
That is a system, and that is a system to fight in Brazil.
Yeah. Well,
we got some time left. Is there anything? Can we think of anything that could start a little bit of fire?
Oh yeah, of course.
What were we talking about before Bolivia came up?
I was
talking about our favorite Pokemon, and you guys were just going off.
I was just about to start really getting into socialism.
Well, can we not get too? We do have a fire warning around here, so can we not light any fires on the stream too heavy? All right, can we just keep
fair and we'll keep it nice and chill. You know, we're gonna really moderate our discourse. It's gonna be good. Okay.
Yeah, just I don't want we don't want to have a bushfire in my backyard. All right, let's just keep this.
I wish I could remember what we were talking about earlier, because before Bolivia there was something I thought was really interesting we were talking about.
If you remember, we can pivot right back to that. Okay. You know what? I just like talking to you, man.
I like talking to you too.
I gotta say, it's very rare that you actually do find a political discourse where people are just exchanging ideas and not shitting on each other.
You know,
but then what's the fun in that? Where's the blood sports?
Yeah, well, I wonder. I mean, a lot of folks.
True.
Yeah, I saw. Yeah, when I was going through some of your videos to try and get a taste of what you do. And by the way, I thought that video, Catboy Nazi, Nick Fuentes, man, that was. I really enjoyed that video. Yeah, from the video you did, like that was fun.
I hope he's able to accept himself in the near future.
Yeah, like that's so sad. Like imagine going through life, and I mean, I don't, pretend to know why he thinks what he thinks. But imagine, like, if really, like, it's all a reaction to, like, this kind of self-hatred for the things that you enjoy deep down. Like, imagine just how deeply sad that...
No.
Imagine.
Imagine all the people.
Yeah, we have to imagine.
Living for today.
Bastiat, no.
What?
You said deeply sad, and then you...
Yeah, that's, like, so deep.
Really?
You did it again!
It's intentional.
No, I think so. He wants to ruin this. Obviously, that's a fact.
No, I'm promised. it's push to talk.
I push to talk. It's sad. When I was in, I think I was like 15 years old, and I realized that I like dudes too, And because I grew up in a progressive household, easiest thing in the world for me to deal with. I've never been bothered a day in my life for it, except for online. But everyone gets called, I'm sorry, I'd be very much mature and responsible here. The F slur online, so it feels almost ubiquitously
a friend
delivered. Yeah, I get called that sometimes too.
Goddamn French.
But yeah, I can't imagine going through my life like hating myself because he thinks he's like that homosexuals go to hell. I mean, this is like a full,
yeah.
It's not just like dislike or disgust. This is like an existential thread. It must really genuinely suck.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
I had. I'm sorry for the problems. I had push to talk turned on because I needed it for when for the guest room, and I just never turned it off. So okay, no more problems now. It's so sad. And then what's extra sad is that part of how I'm going to express that is that I'm literally going to try and create a movement to wreck up the lives of other people. What? And it's so disgusting.
You know what argument I hear all the time, by the way? Have you? And this is so incredibly relevant to our respective ideological differences. Have you heard of the term Nazbol before?
Yeah, National Bolshevists, right?
Yeah, it's getting really popular these days. They're Nazis with a veneer of socialist. Yes. Many of the larger Nazi figures are leaning more towards that. Nick Fuentes has expressed support. Mike Enoch, Eric Stryker lean towards it. Killstream guests tend to lean towards it. Because I guess socialists make really compelling populist, economic arguments that they can.
Yeah, I mean, there's some. I mean, the Nazis abandoned most of the socialist elements of the program when they took power. But I mean,
they slaughtered them. Yeah, they killed all of them.
But while they were running, they had this program of like 25 points that included like no more interest, no more profit interest loans. We're going to end interest slavery. And
fighting Jewish capitalism.
We're gonna have a program of profit sharing, and it seems like what they want is what some of these Nazi types want is they want socialism among white brothers. It's like it's.
Imagine reading up on socialism and believing racial exclusionary theory has anything to do with it. Imagine. Of course, the Nazis abandoned all even remotely socialist talking points when they actually took power, and then they killed all the socialists.
It seems really hard that you could go through and come to the conclusions about the material aspects of life and about how environment shapes people, and then be like, but in spite of all of that. Some people are just inferior. Anyway.
Yeah, naturally, class solidarity, work as the world unite, except actually only 11% of the global population.
Right. Yeah.
I get called you. You're a neolib, right? You identify as a neolib.
Yeah, I identify as that, yeah.
I get called you by Nazbols anytime I say that I'm okay with immigration. Same as those acts, same as Clinton. You just want the people coming in so the big business can. I get the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Oh wow, gay rights. Wow, just like Instagram with their rainbow flag.
You've probably seen this stuff where Americans. One of the things that I think makes America so different with respect to its welfare programs and how compared to, say more homogenous Scandinavian countries, how limited they are, is there's less social trust. And some people say that's because this is a diverse society and people naturally are just less inclined to feel solidarity with people who look different from them. I don't know how true that is, but apparently, some people have done studies into whether, how accepting Americans are of welfare programs. And if they feel like the welfare money is going to people of their own race, I mean, these are white people, I think the only people it's been studied with. If they feel like that it's going to white people, support the working class, support the middle class, But if it's something that everybody has access to, well, suddenly we're skeptical and people need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. So... I do think that rhetoric is popular.
Oh, no denying it. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of racist folk. That rhetoric has been working for centuries. That they're falling for the same grift. Those old union leaders did. Really, it's just been sort of upped in its intensity a little bit because I don't think they were neo-Nazis back then.
This is what I want to ask about.
Really quickly, I just want to say. Really quickly to clarify, there are studies done on this, and it has actually been shown that how do you say community integration or one's degree of relation to their environment, I should say, actually is not negatively impacted intrinsically by racial or cultural diversity. It's only an exigent factor depending on how racist the community tested for beforehand. I'm actually going to post that in the chat because it's super fucking cool how it turns out we're not just naturally exclusionary like that.
Well, that's good to know. That's good to know because I wouldn't think that we are naturally exclusionary, but of course, anything supporting that is certainly helpful. The thing I want to ask about is I typically don't find myself arguing with a lot of people on the left about immigration. I guess normally we don't get there, but I do know that there is some left skepticism of immigration in the sense that I know Cesar Chavez, with the United Fruit Workers, for example. I mean, he tried to they actively tried to keep immigrants out to protect the wages of their membership in, that was already here. And I know that's just one example, from the 1960s and 70s. But I know that there's some skepticism among the left for these kind of international projects, for Brexit, I know is one example, too. There's some kind of left opposition to neoliberalism.
Brexit as well.
He was
in favor.
I mean, that's one reason he was so wishy-washy during the election with his position on it. He was like, I'm not expressing a position. I'm just saying we're going to have a referendum on it so that you, the people, can decide. But he refused to say where he'd come down. And I feel like that's because there's a sense that, look, we can build we can build our project here, and this kind of involvement with other countries is deleterious to the project. You know what I mean? So I don't know much about like the left opposition to open borders. Maybe it's very small.
I mean, this is what got Trotsky killed. I mean, this is the big ideological rifts that ended up getting him exiled from the Soviet Union. He wanted to build international communism. Stalin wanted to focus on the USSR exclusively. I focus much more on internationalism. I don't think that in some cases
here, I don't know.
Hey, me and my fucking tank top, part of the Hibernian Council, the Druidic Cove at the top of the society. I get it to an extent, because if you're like a small developing country, your economy is already super fragile, and most of your constituency, whether or not you were elected or militarily sort of cooed your way into power, your constituency is probably desperately poor, and we're hinging on a lot of promises you made about economic prosperity afterwards. So you're probably going to do anything to preserve those wages, even if it means closing your borders. But I think that, and this is where I guess I would disagree with Corbyn pretty substantially, I think once your country reaches an acceptable level of economic, independence, where you can reasonably provide for the citizens of your country with the existing economy you have, which the UK, America undeniably do. I think at that point, that kind of protectionism, that turning yourself inward, is horribly counterproductive. We have so much to learn, even from a leftist perspective, from the revolutionary struggles happening in other countries. One of the most obvious examples of this, have you been following at all what's been happening on the Syria-Turkey border with the YPG and Rojava?
Yeah, like that, as far as I can think, that has got to be the single worst thing President Trump has done in terms of like human lives lost, like irreversible damage done. Like even the tragedies on the border, I mean, except to the extent there have been deaths, there's some reversibility, but like what he's done to the Kurds, there's no, I mean, like it has been just bloody and brutal beyond belief.
It's just, they're all going to die. It's a matter of time, unless we like change our position on this. But there's nobody else is going to step up. And that's one of the things. There were leftists that were like, oh, so you want American soldiers intervening in Syrian affairs until the end of time? Like, fuck you. Excuse me.
Yeah, if I recall,
what happened to solidarity across borders? Jesus.
I think even Chomsky was like, this is one case where we shouldn't leave. I think that even he came out on
we
that
found
side.
the one good time American soldiers overseas, the one single time it worked, and then and that's the one we pulled out of. Now we're going to fucking war with Iran. Even following the news on that.
Fingers crossed. I don't know. It's hard to say that we're gonna, because it just feels like well, first of all, I'd say I think we had every moral justification to kill this guy. It's just that in terms of, like in the sense that he was trying to kill Americans, he had killed Americans, and whatever you think about our involvement overseas, to the extent we're involved there, I mean, he has been engaged in attacks on or planning attacks on American soldiers. But to me, the real question is, okay, well, if you're gonna kill this guy, as the two prior administrations, Bush and Obama, had considered and had opportunities to do, they both concluded not worth the cost in terms of the blowback, because this is another level of escalation. This is attacking. He's not a proxy. He is Iran. He's not a proxy. And before you attack, this is like attacking the Russians instead of attacking, Vietnam or North Korea or whatever. And, that's a whole other level of escalation. And so I really, on the one hand, I don't really know what Iran can meaningfully do without inviting its own destruction. But on the other hand, I mean, the two prior administrations, who were at least as well informed, probably, whatever you think of them, probably substantially better informed than President Trump, made the decision not to do this. So I don't know. I mean, I think war is unlikely, but, two other administrations thought it was possible.
I mean, I won't defend the guy himself, and I agree that the likelihood of a defensive war here is pretty much nil. There's nothing Iran could do to actually touch the United States. I guess they could just like cruise missile us, but they would get mowed over.
I don't even mean the mainland United States. I just mean like American. American sprinkled all over the area.
The issue I have though is that if we accept this, and I'm not going to defend the guy himself. He was a pretty bad guy. He was a hero to the Iranian people, and he was responsible in large part for fighting against ISIS. So I think he should be respected on those grounds. But when it comes to like the justification for attacking him, I feel like if we go after like indiscriminately bombing people who have like killed our people in the past, like that would give a lot of countries like carte blanche permission to start bombing CIA offices across the globe. You know?
No, I mean in a moral sense, I don't disagree with that.
Okay,
I only have. I mean, I'm not going to say that. You know, if you were Iran and you knew, and I mean this was too long ago now for anybody to still be around, I think, but you know, if you had your sights on the folks who toppled Mossadegh, I think in 1953, I mean, I'm not going to say it would have been it would be morally wrong for you to attack the people who overthrew your democratically elected regime, but I think that you know, if you're in this situation and you're making practical decisions about, you know, how do we preserve American lives or preserve American interests? I mean, I'm not saying it's a moral issue in this situation. I'm not talking about the moral issues in this situation.
No, yeah, I get it. You mean just in like a what do they call it? Like
I mean, cost benefit, I guess.
Politic? Yeah, cost benefit. Or
like if you're there,
politics.
if you're there and it, you know, if you're there and, well, anyway, I think I've expressed the point, but I don't know. I mean, I just would want to know what it is, if anything, that changed that made President Trump conclude, no risk here. This is fine.
Impeachment.
You know?
There's no fucking way that guy actually got to change an information. There's no way Trump listened to military advisors and heard their informed opinions before going through.
Yeah, I mean, for example, one of the things
I hope your optimism is right. You're out of drafting. I've still got 13 months to go.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. Oh, yeah. Well, I don't think there's any risk of a draft with Iran unless China and Russia should come to the rescue of Iran. But that seems likely. That seems likely.
4-3. I'm ready.
Hashtag
I doubt it. I don't think
trending.
So. But what makes this guy arguably a little different, and this is, I don't know that this really changes the calculus too much, but early in 2019, the Quds Force, I believe, that he was the head of, was added to the state, or was added to the, I forget what the name of the group is, but list of groups the U.S. government recognizes as terrorist organizations. And apparently the DOD and the CIA opposed this move, but I guess Trump pushed it through anyway. So I don't know. That to me suggests that there was no like new change in information. This is just President Trump trying to score a win, trying to distract people from the impeachment. And again, while I don't think it was like undeserved, I think it was probably a bad decision.
It's probably a horrible. I mean, this is probably the most overt direct attack we've made against a developed nation in the past like 40 years, is it not? I mean, every other military involvement we got in Afghanistan, Iraq, you know, with Syria, Yemen, Iran is pretty developed.
Well, in terms of I'd say
political connections and like
just a big, a country that can stand up for itself, basically. Yeah. No, I mean, actually, that's I hadn't thought about it like that. I mean, the only argument I can see against it is, or in favor of killing him is, like, again, purely practical here, is he is apparently so, he is like apparently the grand master, and who knows how much of this is posturing and how much of this is accurate, but he is apparently like the grand master of Iran's involvement in the rest of the Middle East, like the strategist who's been kind of orchestrating Syria and Yemen and Iraq, where Iran does have a lot of sway. So I think maybe the calculus was if we, this will kneecap their involvement in the rest of the Middle East, and it'll be worth the cost, and they won't be able to respond. But I don't know. I'm tempted, like you are, to just say impeachment. This is like when Clinton fired those cruise missiles at Iraq. It's just.
Hey, listen. I've already tweeted that in the event of a war, I'm formally supporting Iran. So that I think that exudes me from the draft. I think I don't know if they'd want me out there. God.
I think they're going to send Logan out just as a shield.
Well, what if you get drafted by Iran?
Shit. One or the other. Right there.
As far as I know, they also call for volunteers, but.
God. One really quick question, I guess, then. Sure. Just out of curiosity, what do you think, staying within the purview of capitalism, limited as we are, what do you think can be done about climate change?
I think, so I actually did a stream about this yesterday, because somebody, the fellow I mentioned earlier, Mike, had kind of gone after me as kind of being personally very evil for being involved in fossil fuels. And I work in natural gas, to be specific, natural gas and electricity. And I've had some work with renewables, but it's a very small part of it. So I think that the best thing to do, well, I think that one, I guess under capitalism, although I think really under any system, I don't think you can persuade people to accept, and I include myself here, to accept a lower standard of living. I don't think that's really possible, and I think that is, that takes a lot of draconian stuff off the table, I guess. So, I imagine you could do so for a few years, like in World War II, people suffered a decline in standard of living for 5 or 6 years, but, that wouldn't have gone on, that couldn't have gone on forever. But what I think you could do with climate change is you can try and speed up the process of adoption of renewables and electrification through basically government subsidies and government, and incentives where, basically where those aren't doing it fast enough, just cash and mandates. And I don't know how far. Yeah, well, just to finish the thought.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, I was just going to say. Okay, go ahead.
No. I'm committing to being silent after you.
All right. I don't know how far. I don't know like the precise numbers of like what would be the ideal adoption here, but I feel like a program of one, carbon sequestration of natural gas, 2, increased adoption of nuclear power, and 3, I guess, pushing more renewables. The area that I run into conflict with some people is I don't think you can get rid of, even if you got rid of all the natural gas, I still think you need some nuclear power because you need baseload generation for when your solar and wind is just offline because it doesn't run 100% of the time. And we don't have batteries to make up for that.
To hold
that
all
time.
of it, yeah.
Maybe someday we will, but we don't have that kind of industrial scale battery tech.
I had a really interesting conversation with a physics engineer or an engineering physics major or something along those lines who talked about the potential development of zinc batteries that would be able to hold the excess, and the technology exists, it's just a matter of investment. I'm in favor of nuclear power. I guess what I'm getting at here is because I don't actually disagree with most of your solutions. I think they're all perfectly viable. What if you felt, I suppose this is already happening, so just speaking frankly, there are a lot of propagandists who work for coal and oil who are muddying the conversation to the extent it feels as though we can't get anything done. Do you think that if we're reaching a point where it's literally potential like apocalyptic scenario or severe extrajudicial force against agents who are preventing us from meaningfully addressing a global crisis?
Well,
I'm not trying to bait the question.
Yeah, no, I don't. This is actually a good question because I think, well, it sounded like you were talking about people who spin misinformation, for example.
Anyone who's involved in the chain.
So I am not prepared to change the First Amendment for, as we exercise it in the United States. That's kind of my standard for free expression. And I think that is one of the things, I feel like America should be prouder of that than anything else, because in that sense, we truly are a literally exceptional country. I don't want to change that for any reason. But beyond that, I think what you raise is kind of the specter of because I guess I'm not sure what that would mean domestically. Like if you have already put in emissions controls and money and somebody still refuses to close their factory, I guess I guess if they're breaking the law, you arrest them.
But I mean, the policies would never be implemented because our legislators are so clogged up with all this misinformation on climate change.
I can't imagine. Yeah, I mean, I guess so what you're talking about is a kind of okay, we can't make any progress in our society to deal with these issues. And I feel like that is a super unlikely thing, given that we've already made some progress. But and again, for example, the United States has seen declines in its emissions until last year, because the president, of course, tinkered with the regulations and loosened them. But until last year, we had seen declines in emissions during the period of time that the United States rejected the Kyoto Protocol and rejected the Paris Accords, or the Paris Agreement. So that's the United States not even trying, really, to deal with this stuff on a national and international level. So once we have an administration that is willing to, as President Obama tried, with his limited political capacity since the Republicans held Congress, I think it's totally doable. But in that situation, like at what level would I accept, I guess, kind of violent revolution, basically?
Against certain elements, because I mean, because this is one of the issues I have with capitalism largely, but this is a very specific microcosm where you have systems that can lead to deaths that are on the scale of or greater than literal wars in the past. But we through abstractions we obfuscate who's responsible for what. It's possible for the purchasing decisions of a few CEOs to indirectly lead to what could very well actually be the end of human society as we know it. And I'm not trying to be an edgy LARPer.
No,
here,
you're
just
not.
From a
You're
moral
not. I get what you're
perspective.
I think that for what it's worth, I do think climate change is pretty unique here, because when people talk about other things, like what about famines in British India? Like, well, I would not concede that British India is an example of capitalism at work, you know? That's like mercantilism, colonialism, oppression, all the way down, right? I wouldn't say that's like, oh yeah, that's the market at work, folks. British colonies in India, but just as an example, you know, historically. But by comparison, climate change is super unique, because if the market is working well, if everybody is meeting their needs happily, you know, in this utopia that I don't think I'm proposing utopia, but in the system that I'm advocating for, if everything's working well, the planet still burns, right? So it's different, I think, in that sense, that it's like the ultimate collective action problem, right? Now, I don't know that any kind of sort of extra legal, extrajudicial response could really make it any better. I've been curious about how I'd be curious about how an authoritarian regime might handle it. I know that I know that China is, for example, trying to cut down on pollution, but they're trying to cut down on pollution, I think, because it's so bad there that it's not even a climate issue for them. Right? China's been doing incredible work, by the way, with their system. You know that everyone there, you can't drive your car every day. Your license plate determines which day of the week you get to drive, and some cities have like vouchers that they'll run lotteries for if you get to buy a vehicle or not. It's crazy. And with immediate pollution, I think I believe that was something that was done in cities in California in the past when smog was more of an issue. That like different day driving license plate thing. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I think that kind of stuff, like immediate pollution, like when the rivers were on fire in the 70s in the United States, that was, I mean, I think that's not too hard for a society to wrap its head around and respond to. This one, I guess it's just, I feel like it's harder. Like, I would be curious if China's environment was not so like immediately directly threatened, if they would really still be making all the same progress. But that said, what I think is super important that I forgot to mention in terms of addressing climate change is there needs to be some kind of meaningful international agreement. And what is interesting is the question of, to get to your question of like, when do you use force? How do you, in short, I mean, I think that's what you're basically asking. Like, when do you go outside the system? I'm curious about how you would enforce some kind of, like, what if there was some country, possibly including the United States here, although I imagine we wouldn't be the one here doing this, that is like, you know what, screw you, international community, we are going to keep on polluting because we're trying to improve our standard of living here. We don't want our people to live in misery, right? So they're still belching out, they're breaking the agreement. They're threatening the validity of this solution to collective action problem. Does that justify military force? I don't know.
I am very anti-authoritarian. I don't like states. I don't like corporations. I advocate for democratic seizure of the means of production because I think everyone should have the greatest control over their lives as possible. In the instance of climate change, I don't think there's a degree of authoritarianism or violence I would just too severe to be like off the table, and again, I understand, like LARPy, edgy, revolutionary, whatever, but eventually, we're going to see real issues, there will be swaths of previously productive countryside cloaked in fire. There will be hundreds of millions of migrant refugees or of climate refugees. And when it comes time to that, I don't think people get the choice to not be on board with the solution anymore. I'm being vague because I'm not like saying,
I am, if somebody's saying to me, okay, boss, the planet is going to get miserable, but you'll still have your free society, or it's going to burn, or we're going to clean it up, but you're going to live in authoritarianism, but don't worry, down the line, other people will have their freedom basically restored someday. I don't know if I'm making that deal. I think I will be willing to say, you know what, we'll just innovate ourselves out of the problem. If that's
that's
as unlikely as that may sound, but I'm not willing to concede the future of the planet, I'll take the metaphorical shackles, as it were.
I think the main issue is the earlier we act severely, the less severely we'll have to act.
Yeah. Well, one reason that I was...
20 years down the line, severe action might be a lot worse than what it needs to be today.
Well, that's true. That's true. I mean, at the end of the day, that is, no matter what you think the future will be like, that is the best argument to act today, because if you can reduce it to costs, then your costs are much less the sooner you act. Whereas if you start doing something about it in 2040 rather than 2020, it's all that much more difficult and much worse.
By the way, I take no delight in yes, and then the Revolutionary Party will seize control of the...
Well, that's one thing that also kind of I mean, one area I often have trouble thinking through is the notion of being too extreme at the risk of the other side then becoming more extreme.
The Green New Deal.
Oh.
Addressing climate change, but talking about climate justice, addressing other social goals while we're at it. And I'm really skeptical of those, and I'm also skeptical of I think they make it harder to get these kinds of programs in place. But at the same time, it's hard to imagine, the Republicans will get even more extreme. You know what I mean? Like, they're already on full blast. So, are you there?
Well, I think VAUSH and I talked about this in our interview. We already know the plans of how we're going to fix global warming. It's either the future armor approach, where we drop an ice cube in the ocean, or we get all the gamers out and just through the pale white skin reflect the light rays back into this space. Am I correct with that one?
Agreed. BASTIAT, I just want to say, I'm glad we agree the planet is something that should be saved and protected. And thank you very much for speaking with me. I enjoyed it very much.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, it was a lot of fun. Yeah, I really enjoyed it, VAUSH. I hope we can do it again sometime. I started a YouTube channel, actually, and then I realized, we're doing a stream together today, so we probably don't need it.
Don't ever bring me on your Twitch channel, okay?
I really hope. I don't know if Twitch ever does unbans, but I really hope they do, because I don't know what went down, but I know that I have really enjoyed talking to you, and I think a lot of people I think a lot of people would enjoy that kind of analysis on Twitch too, because right now, it feels like it feels like there's a lot more discussion of the social and less of the economic and the practical, and the social is certainly important, but it's pretty well covered. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. I enjoy it. The social is probably a little bit more fun. You could be a little more flourishy with it, but I agree. Economic discussion is also very important. I want to just say to everyone who's watching again, because I know my chat's active because I'm hosting this. Hey, you guys, fucking donate.
Hell yes.
Doing right now. If you're chatting, that means you can be donating. I didn't stream today because I'm sick, but also so you would have extra fucking neat bucks to throw towards dousing Australia, okay? They are saving koalas from these fires. Do you want koalas to literally go extinct? Because that literally might happen. Maybe, I don't know. I didn't look that up, but it could happen.
Yeah. Well, I heard that like 500 million animals were consumed by the fire. Like, that's terrifying, by any measure. Yeah. So, it's so this is about the most noble cause you can imagine today.
Hopefully,
Well, BASTIAT, thank you, and Ryan, thank you for having me.
Well, yes,
no problem. Thank you, VAUSH, and thanks, Ryan, for organizing this.
No problem. Yes, we're actually about to start doing an artist segment where our guests will compete against each other to see who can draw the best artist thing. I'm not too sure if either of you are the greatest artist. I know VAUSH is, but.
Hey, you know what? Is it done on stream? If it's off stream, because I'm sick as hell, I gotta go. But I can silently contribute, okay?
Yep, if you can silently contribute, you can do that if you want.
I'll throw you a drawing in a little bit, okay?
Okay. But thank you both for coming on. Give both a shout out to your channels, where you can find you.
Sure, you can. So far, I do most of my stuff on Twitch, and twitch.tv/BASTIAT, and there's a link to my channel in the chat if you want to check it out sometime. But don't check it out yet, because we are doing a wonderful stream here. But later on, when you're looking for something to do after they've met their goals and saved Australia, check it out. So
wonderful. And
I'm VAUSH. I stream here on YouTube, and I guess much to my chagrin, I mostly, I guess, talk about Nazis as much as I would love to talk about other more interesting subjects. They just keep finding their way into my Discord.
Nazis
DMs.
are fun, though.
What are you gonna do?
They're fun. It's fun content.
Who would have thought? Who would have thought? 2020. They're just they're
ventures,
back.
Yay! Whoa! The time is a flat circle, I want the Charleston to come back. It's fun.
Give him
Fun
enough
little
time.
Jake. And Dada too. That's good stuff. Thank you guys.
Well, thank you very much for coming
Take
on.
care.
Alrighty. So, thank you, or we'll see you guys later.